Paul Fromm with the Canada First Immigration Reform Committee. Perhaps no other issue is as important to the future of our country as immigration, because immigration basically determines who we are. What will be the makeup of the country 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? Will we still be a predominantly European country? Well, I've got bad news for you. If the immigration policy that is supported by all 5 Canadian parties remains in place, by 2050, according to Statistics Canada, the European founding settler people will be a minority. Canada will have been changed beyond recognition, not through an armed foreign invasion or a mass famine that wiped out most of the population, but by cold-blooded, sneaky policies quietly agreed to by the entire Canadian elite. And we will be being changed, and we will be losers. Okay, what should a country do in terms of immigration? Well, first of all, and really it's a matter of numbers and makeup, or perhaps to put it a bit differently, how many and who. Well, let's start with really what ought to be the easiest, and that's how many. The immigration discussion, to the extent it exists at all, is filled with slogans that turn out to be lies. You may even have believed them, and there's nothing, this is not a criticism of you or anybody else, because that's about all you hear. For instance, you've probably heard the slogan, you may even have said it yourself. We need immigration to grow the economy. That's what our former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said. But it isn't just Harper, the Conservative, the Liberals, the NDP, the Bloc, even the Green Party. They're supposed to be worried about protecting the environment. You're not going to protect the environment if you keep bringing more and more people in. But anyway, they would all agree you need immigration to grow the economy. Well, this is an easy lie or myth to take apart. All right, well, let's put it in the specific. We have a potential immigrant. Let's say his name is Mohammed. Now, Mohammed comes to Canada. There are only 2 possibilities. Mohammed will get a job. Good for him. Good for Mohammed. He has a job. But bad for Canada. I'll tell you why. Canada, and this is being recorded in January 2016, Canada's official unemployment rate is 7.1%. The real unemployment rate is probably twice that. The reason I say that is the unemployment figures only capture those people who are collecting employment insurance benefits. People who have exhausted their benefits are not even counted. But anyway, officially it's 7.1%. So, with 7.1% unemployment, if Mohammed gets a job, a Canadian remains unemployed. Canada loses. We have to continue to pay that person unemployment insurance, and if he exhausts his benefits, we have to pay him welfare and so on. His life is probably damaged. He may have lost his car, he may have lost his house, his marriage may have broken up because of unemployment. Canada loses. Now that's if Mohammed gets a job. What about the other possibility? Mohammed doesn't get a job. Well, boo-hoo-hoo, poor Mohammed. But we're not supposed to say these things anymore, but Canada was a Christian country. That flag that's behind me, you see the Union Jack up in the top left-hand corner? That was the flag of the original Canada, the flag of the real Canada. You see the cross within the Union Jack? We're a Christian country. And it was Christian morality that led us to feel that we can't let people starve. We have welfare, we have economic support. So we're not going to let Mohammed starve because he doesn't have a job. He'll go on welfare. He's got a big family. There's no place for them to stay, so he goes into public housing. And of course there are the additional costs of educating his kids and policing and social working and all that. As long as there is high unemployment, whether the newcomer gets a job or doesn't get a job, Canada loses. That's a basic point. We don't. The fact is, we don't need immigration. Now, you may have heard other arguments that we have an aging population. That's true. Aging population. Why would we need immigration? Well, they used to say, we need immigration to pay taxes, to pay for your old age benefits. I think even the immigration lobby eventually decided that was too much of a bogus argument. Why? Because, well, anybody who actually has a job knows you pay CPP, you pay into a pension plan, and your employer matches your deductions. So if the argument is that we need more immigrants to pay taxes to pay for our pensions, does that mean the entire Canada pension plan was a big scam? Well, they've pulled away from that argument. We've got an aging population. Why do we need immigration? As long as we have high unemployment, we don't need any immigration whatsoever. What was the other argument they like to use? Oh, I know. We've got a labor shortage. Now, that's the problem with mantras or arguments that are just repeated over and over again, especially when there's hardly been ever a discussion about immigration. I understand if that's all you've ever heard, maybe you believe that. But think about it for just a moment. We have a labor shortage. Really? Where? 1.5 million Canadians out of work. 900,000 Canadians, according to Statistics Canada, in part-time jobs involuntarily. These are not people who want a part-time job. These are people who want a full-time job, but all they can get is part-time. Now, with roughly 2.5 million Canadians out of work or underemployed, where is that labor shortage? Show me one profession that has a labor shortage. Do we have a labor shortage of people to pour coffee at Tim Hortons? No. In fact, and this was a topic of another one of my immigration chats, the temporary foreign workers scamorama. Many Tim Hortons outlets across Canada and other fast food outlets brought in large numbers of temporary foreign workers, not because Canadians wouldn't work, but because they wanted them cheaper. Unfair and wrong. So there is no labor shortage, not with nearly 2.5 million Canadians unemployed or underemployed. Where's the labor shortage? So that's a slogan. Sounds good. But when you examine it, it doesn't add up to much. Okay, so back to the question of how many. None. That's the important insight. Right now, with high unemployment, we don't need any immigration at all, because immigration will simply cost. But it's not I who says that. Herb Grubel was a former member of Parliament. He's an economist. He's a professor. He was a professor of economics at Simon Fraser University. He's now a scholar with the Fraser Institute. He and a man named Patrick Grady 5 years ago did this study, Immigration and the Canadian Welfare State, 2011. They found that far from growing the economy, immigration is blighting the economy. The group of immigrants who came in between 1985 and 2010, Grubel and Grady studied this group and found that they cost the Canadian Treasury $25 billion a year. Now, how did they come to that conclusion? Well, what they did was they calculated the taxes that this group contributed. Income tax, provincial sales tax, property tax, all the taxes that a GST or HST as the case might be, all the taxes they paid, and then they looked at what they took out of the pot. The taxes what they put into the tax pot and what they took out in terms of social benefits, well, Medicare, and all the other benefits that we get from the taxpayers. And what they found was every year that group of immigrants that came between 1985 and 2010 took $25 billion more than they put in. So the argument that we need immigration to grow the economy, no, that group was an absolute detriment. And buried in their report is a statement that I found really amazing. Grubel and Grady said, "We also note that recent immigrants have contributed to the growing poverty as measured by the government's own index. This has important implications for economic and social policy. Poverty can make it more difficult for the children and grandchildren of immigrants to succeed economically and will thus tend to perpetuate itself." So immigration has actually contributed to poverty. And also in this report, one sentence, and I really wish they'd highlighted that and put it on the front page because it's worth the entire study. One sentence said that if there was to be a complete halt in immigration, there would be an immediate and significant improvement in the economic standing of the most vulnerable or the poorest people in Canada. In other words, immigration perpetuates poverty in Canada. We lose. Far from being a benefit, it is a detriment. It is in fact, as a good friend of mine says, a cancer. So, the question about numbers, well, that's simple. As long as we have high unemployment, we don't need any at all. Well, you might ask, well, why governments, liberal and conservative over the years, do this to us? That's a good question. I'll tell you why. It's a cheap labor policy. It serves the interests of businesses to have a large pool of unemployed Canadians. It keeps wages down. It means people are easily disposed of. If you're not working out, we can get rid of you tomorrow and fill your place by someone who might even work cheaper than you will. It is a boneheaded policy. It may benefit a few very rich people, but it's bad for Canadians. What we need are well-paid, predictable, permanent jobs so that young Canadians can have the children we need. And that brings me to the second question. We've dealt with the first question: how many should we bring in terms of immigrants? This is the more difficult question. Who should we bring in? Well, you'll never get that discussed in Canada. That's one of the forbidden questions. I'll tell you why it's forbidden. Because there has been a cold-blooded, deliberate policy to change the makeup of this country. I'll devote another talk as to why that might be, but let's just say that's what has happened. In 1965, when our immigration policy was changed, incidentally, the same year Lester B. Pearson changed our flag from this flag. The same year, in that year, Canada was 95% European. This is a European nation. Never mind the multicultural propaganda. Canada was built and developed by Europeans. Mostly in the early days, the French, the British, the Scots, the Irish, maybe even a few of the Vikings, and much more recently, people from other parts of Europe. This is a European country. Our languages, I guess, French and English, are European. Our laws, our political system, European or more particularly British. Our culture, European. Our religion, European. It's a European country. Well, that began to change. And what is particularly evil is it changed without there ever being a discussion. Now, I might not like change, but if we've had a fair and open public discussion, and after that there's a vote, and people in a referendum and they decide we'll change in this direction or that direction, then fair enough. But we were never asked. Well, we were asked once and then ignored. Way back in 1976, the government undertook a consultation with people across the country. What did they want in terms of immigration? You'll probably never hear this, but Canadians spoke up resoundingly. Individual submissions to the parliamentary committee were amounted to 76% saying either to stop all immigration or all non-traditional immigration. 3/4 of the people who wrote to the committee, either letters or individual briefs, wanted immigration entirely stopped. Only 7% said that they wanted a more open door immigration policy. Guess what the parliamentary committee went with? The 7%. There are other kind of indications of people's opinion. A Gallup poll taken in June 1987 asked Canadians, do you think that the size and content of immigration should be permitted to change our ethnic and cultural balance? In other words, should immigration be allowed to change the makeup of the country? No, said 77.6%. Now, another concept is the absorptive capacity. In other words, a country can take in a certain number of people who are fairly different without actually changing the nature of the country. So once that's explained to people, they were asked, do you favor or do you not favor adopting an absorptive capacity policy for Canada? In other words, would you like an immigration policy that would prevent Canada's makeup being radically changed? 76.3%, according to the Globe and Mail in 1987, said yes. In other words, Canadians did not want the makeup of this country changed, but it was changed by stealth and by policy and by collusion of all 5 major political parties. Canada was started off and is today a European country, but it won't be if present immigration levels remain as they are, and the makeup, 85% of our annual intake is from the third world. Now that's not just because only the third world wants to come. There are barriers put in the way of a lot of immigration from Europe. There have been all sorts of anecdotal stories of people who had $500,000 in the bank, spoke a couple of languages, had no criminal record, stable family life, owned a home in Britain or in Italy or Germany, had a good job offer in Canada. They can't get in. Meanwhile, hordes and hordes of people from the third world somehow seem to qualify. So as to the question of who gets in, all right, the simplest answer is nobody gets in, because with high unemployment we don't need anybody, at least not now. Perhaps the day may come when we have full employment, and there are jobs that need for which there aren't workers. At that point, yes, we could look at immigration. Then what should we do? Well, people have been so brainwhacked about that term discrimination. Well, every choice is discrimination. If I pick up this napkin rather than that napkin, I'm discriminating. I'm favoring this as opposed to that. What I think would be fair is to have an immigration policy with a double quota. There's an overall quota for the year, and that is dependent entirely upon labor needs. If there are no labor needs, that makes it simple, no immigration. But should the day come when there are labor needs, all right, let's say we need 50,000 people this year. Okay, 50,000, that's quota number 1. Quota number 2 will be who will get in under that quota. Immigration should not be allowed to upset the ethnic balance. So, according to the last census, if Group A was, let's say, 5% of the Canadian population, well then they would have dibs on 5% of the overall quota. We will no longer have immigration that will continue to change the ethnic balance. They have to be culturally compatible. So in other words, if they say, no, I'm special, I have to be able to pack a dagger, or I need to wear a turban, or my woman has to be in a bag from head to foot, and no way. If you can't fit in, there are other places for you. And if you don't like our way, if you think we're the great Satan, if you think you have the right to murder your daughter because she's embarrassed the family because she wants to put makeup on, you're entitled to those views. But maybe you ought to stay in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. We don't need you. If you're not culturally compatible, no way. This is common sense about immigration, and I urge you to start the dialogue with your friends. It's not that people are stupid. It's often that they've heard so much lies and propaganda that they perhaps have never really thought about these things. But it's your future. It's also our young people's future. Do you really want your children and grandchildren to be living in a mixed turmoil, in the sort of grab bag of competing in different cultures and groups, or would you like the stable Canada that you grew up in to remain the same? These are important questions. I urge you to speak up. This is Paul Fromm with Canada First Immigration Reform Committee.